Hey guys, I'm Red Fox, and welcome back to Dark Souls. You all have read the title of the video, so you know that it's time to do a run where I basically just run away from everything and range spam. Also, I'll be wearing Gwyndolyn's clothes too. In seriousness, this is going to be a run through Dark Souls as the God of the Moon and the lastborn of the Great Lord Gwyn, Dark Sun Gwyndolin, Lord of Moonlight and Master of the Blades of the Darkmoon. That's not all though. Since you guys really enjoy the extra challenges I tack on themed around the lore of the character I'm cosplaying, and I enjoy doing said challenges because it makes the roleplay more fun and interesting than guy with X weapon and Y armor beat game, I packed this run with a load of added challenges to give myself and hopefully you guys the true Gwyndolin experience. First, nearly 10 mandatory challenges. In addition to, of course, beating the game wearing Gwyndolyn's clothes and wielding both of the weapons that can be made from Gwyndolyn's soul, the Tin Darkmoon Catalyst and the Darkmoon Bow, I have to complete the following challenges. First, the Last Heir. I must rekindle the first flame, symbolizing Gwyndolyn's reverence for his father and his adherence to his wishes of perpetuating the Age of Fire. Next, Darkmoon Justice. I've got to join the Blades of the Darkmoon Covenant and reach the highest rank since Gwyndolin himself is the Master of the Covenant. Then, Illusory Reign. I cannot, under any circumstances, attack or dispel Guinevere's illusion in Anor Londo, maintaining the illusion of her presence to keep order. The other illusions are fair game since I, as Gwyndolin, can just restore them, but to lay hand against Sister Guinevere is strictly forbidden. The fourth challenge is the Hidden Sun. I have to avoid direct melee combat entirely, relying only on my sorcery and the Darkmoon Bow, reflecting Gwyndolyn's actual fighting style. Of course, I also have to do Execution of the Heretic. As the leader of the Blades of the Darkmoon, I must avenge the Firekeeper of Firelink Shrine by invading and killing Lautrec. He is a murderer who would go unpunished if not for Gwyndolyn's divine justice. Pretty self-explanatory there. Next, Forsaken Father. I must defeat Gwyn without parrying him, representing Gwyndolyn's inability to stand against his father directly, which also somewhat works with the Hidden Sun challenge. Then Moonlight's Influence, where I've got to get and use the Moonlight Seance Ring at all times to symbolize my connection to the Dark Moon, something I originally wasn't gonna do since the ring is mostly worn by Covenant members instead of Gwyndolin himself, but I ended up deciding to do anyway for the challenge of it. Then No Light But the Moon. I must not kill any Firekeepers in Lordran in order to maintain the blessed sunlight of the once great Lord. And lastly, the Chosen must prove themselves. Before I can enter the Kiln of the First Flame, I must have defeated at least 5 bosses under the conditions of this challenge, so no melee and only sorcery and bow attacks. I also further included some mandatory NPC interactions for the run. First, an audience with Kingseeker Frampt. I must speak with Frampt at least once and place the Lord Vessel with him. Gwyndolin sees Frampt as an ally and guide who spreads the prophecy of the chosen undead and leads them towards maintaining the Age of Fire. Second, the Ledger of Sin. I must purchase 99 indictments from Oswald of Carim as a symbolic act of Gwyndolyn's divine justice. Oswald serves Velka, the goddess of sin, whose influence intertwines with the Blades of the Dark Moon. By stockpiling indictments, I would be ensuring that sinners across Lordran are marked for punishment, reinforcing Gwyndolyn's role as the hidden enforcer of the god's will. Third is the Last Night. The Dragon Slayer that remains may or may not be an illusion of my creation, but I must test Executioner Smough's loyalty to Anor Londo's rule. I must defeat Ornstein first, then face Smough one-on-one in a final duel to test his fitness to remain as a protector of the Princess of Sunlight. Fourth and last of the mandatory interactions, the Moonlit Puppet. Rhea is a devout follower of the gods, making her a potential servant of Gwyndolyn's will. I must speak to her in Firelink Shrine and the Tomb of the Giants, but I may not interfere with her fate. Whether she is consumed by the dark or finds her purpose is up to the gods. Finally, to top everything off, I've included 3 optional NPC interactions that are more to do with theories, deep lore, and future events in Dark Souls 2 and 3 lore that has yet to pass, playing on the cyclical nature of Dark Souls. First, the Forgotten Mother. I may enter the Painted World of Ariamis, but I cannot attack Crossbreed Priscilla unless she becomes hostile. If the theory of Priscilla being Gwyndolyn's mother is true, he would never harm her, even if she remains hidden in exile. I can also choose to just leave the Painted World entirely without conflict. Next, the False Faith. I must never join the Way of the White Covenant, and I should either kill or ignore Petrus of Thorolund. The Way of White follows Lloyd, the usurper of Anor Londo's rule, and they would likely view Gwyndolin as a weak or illegitimate deity. If Rhea is still alive, I can spare her as a misguided follower, but the rest of the Thorolin clerics are enemies. Last but not least, the Traitor's Shadow. I cannot join the Dark Wraiths, but I also can attack Koth. While the Abyss is an enemy of the gods, Gwyndolin is a passive ruler, preferring deception over direct warfare. He would see Koth's machinations as a threat, but one best countered through manipulation rather than outright destruction. So, with that in mind, in this video, I'm gonna try to find out if you can beat the original Dark Souls 1 as Dark Sun Gwyndolin. So, for this run, I chose to do an SL160 build since I did an SL120 build for Smough and Ornstein since that's the soul level of a complete build, and I noticed that consuming their souls also happens to give 12,000 souls, so since Gwyndolin is likely a bit stronger than both of them lore-wise due to being a son of Gwyn, and also due to his being able to put all of Anor Londo under an illusion that includes most of the enemies you fight there, and might even include Ornstein himself depending on which lore theories you ascribe to, and since Gwyndolин's soul grants you 16,000 souls when consumed, I went with SL160 for Gwyndolin because it was proportionate to ONS being SL120 and having souls worth 12,000 souls. I mainly dumped into Intelligence to be able to cast Soul Spear, Dexterity for faster spellcasting time and scaling with the Darkmoon bow, and I dumped a whopping 90 points into Faith since Gwyndolin's Catalyst scales with Faith. In terms of armor, I'm pretty much just rocking Gwyndolin's clothes, which have a similar toughness to bed sheets, though the crown boosting all magic damage is definitely a nice bonus. And I also have the lion's share of weapons compared to my other boss runs so far. Instead of just one weapon, I get the Darkmoon bow with an accompanying 999 Moonlight arrows, as well as the 10 Darkmoon catalyst and several spells, most notably homing Soul Mass and Soul Spear, the two closest approximations to the two spells Gwyndolin uses in his boss fight, with me opting not to use the stronger crystal versions of each spell because crystal sorcery is more of Seath's thing. I was actually able to get both weapons in one run because, for my final foreseeable challenge on the OG Dark Souls for a while, I figured out how to dupe items, which I proceeded to freak out about on both the channel Discord and Twitter. Follow me there if you'd like to see said freakouts in the future. In terms of the basic, most fundamental aspects of the challenge, that's it. I have Gwyndolин's clothes and can only use his catalyst and bow. Let's test out what 90 points of faith and the 10 Darkmoon catalysts can do. Yep, that's about what I expected. I also freaked out about that in my Discord and on Twitter when I was playing through on my first run to collect all of Gwyndolин's gear on New Game, but sorcery is just straight up cheating. I've never done a sorcery run before, so it was incredibly surprising and satisfying to me to find out how easy it made the game. And with these high-level sorceries and insane scaling, I don't imagine most pre-Gwyndolin bosses are gonna last too long. As long as I can make space between me and my opponent, they're as good as done for. Starting to understand the appeal of a nearly infinitely extending corridor. Well, now that we have access to Lordran proper, it's time to take on the first of the additional challenges, Moonlight's Influence. Time to head to the Catacombs to go and get the Darkmoon Seance Ring, which I must wear for the rest of the entire run. This run-through took way longer than I'd like to admit, but after roughly a half hour of frustration at getting jumped by bony boys and those stupid fireball-spamming necromancers, I finally got the Darkmoon Seance Ring, popped it on, and there it will remain until Twilight takes Lordran whole. With my first major challenge complete, it was time for the Darkmoon to sweep his way through the Undead Burg using arrows of sorcery until he was able to purchase the resident key from the Undead Merchant. I'd like to, if at all possible, stockpile as many copies of Homing Soul Mass and Soul Spear as possible, and Griggs and his master Big Hat Logan are gonna help me with that. After slipping past a bunch of hollow soldiers with surprising dexterity, must be all the mobility I have from secretly having a ton of snakes for legs, I'm able to make it to the Taurus Demon.
Hark, big brutish beast, for these moments and these breaths shall be thy last.
After taking out the Taurus Demon in a matter of seconds, I meet my father's #1 fan and general friend of the family, Solaire, and then cross the Hellkite Bridge and fight my way through all the hollows to the Undead Parish. I talked to Andre to try to upgrade my Darkmoon bow since I only got it to +3 in my first run through the game, but I was short a Demon Titanite. Luckily, there just so happens to be a perfect source of Demon Titanite not but 20 feet behind me. I took out the Titanite demon easily, words I do not get the distinguished honor of uttering very often, and he drops a demon Titanite, which allows me to get my Darkmoon bow to +4. I'll be able to get the last of the demon Titanite I need for +5 at Anor Londo, and yes, I know you can get some from Sens, but I don't want to. So for now, tired of waiting on useless undead to rekindle the first flame, Gwyndolin has a prophecy to fulfill and a bell to ring. I take out the Tower Knight with sorcery to get the Firekeeper soul, snipe the Channeler with my newly upgraded Darkmoon bow, I free this wrongly imprisoned Sir Lautrec of Karim, faithful servant and favored champion of Fina, goddess of fateful beauty and protection, and I take on the first of my own trials and tribulations on the journey to rekindle the first flame, the Bell Gargoyles.
Heed me, loyal, powerful, and sturdy protectors of the Bell of Awakening. Rest now, for thou hast earned thy slumber, and the darkness of twilight doth call to thee so.
I made sure to call Solaire to help, not because I thought I'd need help, but because I'm sure he'd be elated to assist a son of Lord Gwyn fulfilling his wishes. Well, that is to say if he knew Gwyndolin was Gwyn's son, or believed him when Gwyndolin told him. In any event, no, I definitely didn't need help, as it only took 3 soul spears and a homing soul mass I set up prior to the fight to take out the first gargoyle's whole health bar, and only took 2 more soul spears to take out the other gargoyle. I rang the first Bell of Awakening, and then met with another faithful and devout follower of the gods, Priest Oswald of Karim, devotee of my ally and close personal friend, Velka, goddess of sin. With the ton of souls I had just gotten from the Bell Gargoyles fight, I was able to complete my first mandatory NPC interaction, the Ledger of Sin. I used my souls to purchase 99 indictments from Oswald, as well as a Book of the Guilty and the Karmic Justice Miracle, an act that the fair and just Oswald deemed honorable of me. I hope to gain the same veneration through this journey as Oswald has for Velka. After freeing Griggs in the lower Undead Burg, hoping to gain a new acolyte at most, some more casts of homing soul mass and soul spear at least, I took on the Capra demon, which was incredibly difficult and one of maybe only 2 or 3 bosses that was still pretty difficult even with a ranged build because of the dogs.
Foul, filthy beast, unfit to step foot beyond the molten rock of Izalith. How foolish art thou to sick hounds upon me. Thou shalt evermore rue the day thy withered form and crass visage, nary a thought betwixt thine own eyes, did so subject me to this torment.
With the Capra demon defeated after so many attempts, I got the key to the depths. I know I could have technically skipped Capra demon and Gaping Dragon by using the master key to enter Blighttown through the way of Drake Valley, but where's the fun in that? Well, I free Laurentius and summon Solaire to aid me once more in the battle against the Gaping Dragon, but I somehow got teleported into the Gaping Dragon's hand instantly and got eaten right at the end of the fight, so not wanting to bother using another humanity to summon Solaire again, this time I just went in solo.
O dragon, descended of the mighty foes of the gods that once ruled the skies, how far thou hast fallen. Once a race that gave even my father cause for concern, now reduced to a mewling cur writhing in thine own filth. I shall put thee to thine end, so that I might preserve the dignity of thine forefathers, and bring this misery to an end, like the darkness that signals the end of sunlight and heralds the twilight.
Yeah, suffice it to say, after a speech like that, I took it out on my second attempt pretty easily. Magic is incredibly powerful, and ranged combat in general is pretty busted in this game, even without god-level stats. After the always pleasant experience of making my way through Blighttown down to the bottom to ring the second Bell of Awakening, I was ready to take on the Chaos Witch Quelaag, the remnant of a good-natured but hubris-fueled fatal mistake.
I bear no ill will for demonkind, for my father hath made treatise unto thee. But if the flame of chaos hath taken thee so that thou shalt raise thy blade against the progeny of the Lord of Sunlight, then so be it.
Yeah, this was another extremely easy fight because of all the attacks Quelaag has that requires her to stand still for a pretty inordinate amount of time. I pretty much just back up, baited an attack when she caught up, got out of range, blasted her with a soul spear or a homing soul mass, and then repeated until death. Now with 2 Bells of Awakening rung, I've earned the right to venture into Sen's Fortress to take on the Iron Golem to in turn earn the right to enter Anor Londo, not by virtue of lineage, but by right of merit. Also, I don't believe Gwyndolin would lie about being a servant of a Chaos Witch. but I also don't think he would strike down someone just for not allowing him to access a bonfire, so no Chaos Witch bonfire this run, which will slightly inconvenience me later, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. For now, after speaking to Rhea in Firelink to progress the Moonlit Puppet mandatory NPC interaction challenge, I use my bow and magics to fight my way through Sens, I free Big Hat Logan, a fellow scholar of sorceries and source of copies of Homing Soulmass and Soul Spear, I use my Darkmoon bow to defeat the bomb-throwing giant atop the boss room wall, and then I take on the Iron Golem.
Valiant tester of brave heroes and knights, thou art strong. I thank thee for thy years of service, but it brings me no solace to say that thou must be decommissioned for a worthy cause. Come, show thy immutable loyalty one last time.
This boss was easily the most Gwyndolin fight for me in my mind. I quite literally fired some magic at him and kept backing away and casting until I ran out of room, at which point I just rolled between his legs and did it again until I hit the other side, and repeated that until the golem collapsed. For my reward, I was taken to Anor Londo, a bittersweet sight of the glorious splendor of Father Sunlight, yet a hollow illusion cloaked in darkness, not dissimilar to myself. Hello, member of my covenant. Keep up the good work. After I got a Demon Titanite here, I was able to clear the scaffolds with relative ease thanks to my magic. That allowed for me to start my Darkmoon Justice quest by joining the Blades of the Darkmoon Covenant. Don't mind the voice of Gwyndolin you're hearing, that's just a pre-recorded message. I'll have to achieve max rank, which requires 100 souvenirs of reprisal, the severed ears of those that have sinned against the gods and their people, but let's try to just get one ear for now. Before that, I had one hell of a time getting past this Archer of Anor Londo, but was rewarded with some more needed Demon Titanite from this big brute after I just shot him from outside after a brief and scary direct encounter, and after that, I finally got the chance to complete my next challenge, Execution of the Heretic. Regardless of his favor with Fina, Lautrec's sin of murdering a blessed firekeeper has been recorded in the Great Book of wrong book. The Book of the Guilty, and so I, as the head of the Blades of the Darkmoon, have come to deliver divine punishment. Well, I tried to snipe him and his buddies from across the room with the Darkmoon bow, but him and his boys just jumped me and I died. Don't worry though, as I come back a second time and defeat the villainous foe, avenging Anastasia and repossessing her soul so that she might be returned to her holy duties, gaining but one of 100 souvenirs of reprisal in the process. A great start if I do say so myself. I only needed a single Demon Titanite to upgrade my Darkmoon bow to +5 at this point, so I nabbed one from this chest over here after slipping past these illusory giant knights here, and then I upgraded my Darkmoon bow to +5, completely upgrading everything that I can strengthen. Now it's time to take on Smough and Ornstein.
O brave and valiant knights, protectors of the Princess of Sunlight, come to me, aspirant to the Knights of Gwyn, captain of the Knights of Gwyn, and favored of my dear eldest brother. I would test thee in thine abilities to perform thy duty of utmost importance. You now face the Dark Sun, true heir to the throne of the Great Lord.
This has got to have been one of my favorite ONS fights ever. I beat them both on my first try in both my new game run at SL70 before even fighting Gwyndolin, and this time around too. Being that this is the hardest boss fight in the base game and has definitely given me its fair share of troubles in the past, I'm always intimidated when I hear those sharp string instruments cueing Ornstein's descent from the balcony, but this time around, they were really no different from any other boss. I just backed up, they eventually catch up and attack, I move out of range, I blast with magic, rinse and repeat. Of course, because of the last night mandatory NPC interaction, I've got to take out Ornstein first, either defeating the knight that's really already proven himself due to being the captain of the Knights of Gwyn, or dispelling an illusion if you believe that this isn't actually Ornstein and is just an illusion from Gwyndolin, and then I take out Smough in Phase 2. Thankfully, that's probably the easier approach, since it's good to take out Ornstein quickly because he's the faster of the two, and it's easier to take out Ornstein first because he has lower health than Smough. Phase 2 Smough is also probably easier than Phase 2 Ornstein because Smough's slower, so it's easier to range spam and keep distance. And Smough's a bigger target, so you're more likely to land on him than on Ornstein. After bowing to the great efforts of the knights, and then of course bowing in the presence of a statue of my father, I rode Ornstein's elevator up to the illusion of my dear sister Gwyndolin, daughter of Lord Gwyn and Queen of Sunlight. To keep up illusions, literally, I kneel before her, listen to my own prophecy being fed to me through the false lips of my sister's appearance, and I accept the Lord Vessel. Perhaps one day the kingdom will be ready for a great Lord of the Darkmoon, but now is not that day. Using the power of the Lord Vessel to warp back to Firelink, I restore Anastasia of Astora and speak with my cohort, Kingseeker Frampt, where I explain to him that, after too many undead failing to rekindle the flame for far too long, I've taken the rekindling upon myself. He takes me to the Firelink Chamber, a place for the successor of Lord Gwyn, and I place the Lord Vessel on the altar so I can start feeding its soul's commiserate to Father Gwyn's own soul, which will open the door to the kiln of the first flame and allow me to rekindle the flame. That's also my next mandatory NPC interaction, an audience with Kingseeker Frampt, complete. Now, this might be a bit of a cop-out, but next, I item dupe 99 souvenirs of reprisal for the Darkmoon Justice Challenge. I think it would have been cooler if I earned them by way of how the Covenant actually functions, and it would have been more accurate to the roleplay, and I probably would have just made the challenge to get 80 souvenirs of reprisal to gain rank 3, but this is OG Dark Souls on the Xbox, where you have to pay to play online, and the online community for the game is practically dead at this point anyway. Well, I give myself all 100 souvenirs of reprisal and complete the quest. At least it took me a half hour to give myself all the souvenirs. Now, the first of the 4 lords that I planned to take on was the Bed of Chaos, since she has the most amount of bosses between myself and her, but that's where that roleplay from earlier with that egg guy comes back to bite me. I can't just warp to that bonfire because I never lit it, so I have to go all the way back down to Framerate Town on foot. Really not that bad, honestly, but definitely a minor inconvenience.
Poor fellow, made to a writhing mass of agony. I shall set thee to ease like the tranquil, cool peace of night.
At first I tried to be fancy and bait Ceaseless with the Darkmoon bow, but bro range spammed me. Oh, how the turns have tabled. The second time, after spending a minute sniping this Capra demon with the Darkmoon bow for some stress relief, I just did the fight normally and he fall down go boom. I finish off that Capra demon from earlier, exterminate what's left of his pitiable race, and then take on the Fire Sage demon.
O demon, swathed in the flames of chaos, I find thy mastery of magics commendable, but thou standest in the way of the Dark Sun, god of the Darkmoon, and you shall find that your flames offer you no quarter against me.
Well, that's actually not true because he smashes my face in. I don't know why, but sometimes this guy is pretty tough. He was definitely a pain in the ass for this run, but after more failures than I care to admit, I decided to just cheese him. I've lost my fair share of attempts to the geometry of this arena, so now it's his turn. I get him stuck on this route, and then just proceed to take him out with my Darkmoon bow and Moonlight arrows. Now I've got to take on the last of the bosses before the Bed of Chaos, the Centipede demon. It wasn't ridiculously hard in New Game, but I knew I'd want Solaire there to help me so Solaire could take aggro while I range spam since I didn't have a lot of room to move around and definitely didn't have the health to move through lava.
Ferocious creature, wriggling violently and crying out in endless hunger, be sated, for the moonlight leaves all in bliss.
Sniping with the Darkmoon bow wasn't really getting those damage numbers I needed before Solomir Gwyndolin either killed Solaire or switched aggro to me, so next try I spammed Soul Spear, which went much better, but didn't take. Finally, on my third try, everything went just right. Solaire distracted the demon well, I landed lots of Soul Spears for massive damage, and I survived a couple near one-shots and barely finished the boss off with a great heavy soul arrow. Unfortunately for me, I'm wearing the FAP ring and can't take off the Moonlight Seance ring, so I take off and break my FAP ring so that I can equip the lava ring. Don't worry, I have another FAP ring I can put on, but I'm not going to be able to put it on until I beat the 4 kings, since their boss fight also requires a free ring slot for the Covenant of Artorias. I walk through the rest of Lost Izalith, take out one of the last remaining daughters of the Witch of Izalith, get murdered by Kirk, run it back and avenge the deicide of this foul thorny boy, and take on the Bed of Chaos.
Great Witch, once a lord worthy of commanding respect from even Father Gwyn, thy form twisted by a well-intended mistake of grandiose and self-import. I do not blame thee, but I shall bring thy suffering to its end, and bring you to quiet like that of dusk.
What a pain in the ass this boss was, like pretty much every other time. The 2 daughter chaos bugs are as simple as always, but the queen makes sure to defend herself. Something that particularly annoyed me was the tracking on her stupid little scythe things, and it doesn't help that they one-shot since I have less than 700 health. After a little bit of timing and a lot of luck, I'm able to reach the heart of the Bed of Chaos and kill the Witch of Izalith just as she kills me with a Chaos Storm, but I wasn't worried because this exact same thing happened in my new game run and the victory took, so I just went back to get my souls and warped away at the bonfire. After heading back to Anor Londo to get a refill of Moonlight arrows and to snag the Hawk Ring for extended range, I went to Darkroot to take on Sif for the Covenant of Artorias since the Four Kings are next due to the aforementioned ring management issues. Gwyndolin's main battle tactic in his boss fight is to use his magic to nearly infinitely extend the corridor he's in, continuously teleport away from the player, and attack from range. I figured there's no better way to replicate this than by teleporting out of the boss arena and then using my Darkmoon bow, now with extended range, to snipe Sif.
Well met, brave and loyal companion. We few know the truth of thy master, yet with your aid, his covenant shall grant me the power to rekindle the first flame. Stand proud, great Sif, for in the end, he availed the abyss indeed.
I start the boss fight, save and quit to teleport out of the boss room, post up on this wall here where I snipe at Sif with the Darkmoon bow until the fight is over. Now on to the Four Kings. Oh yay, my favorite part of every run, getting ganked by a couple hundred ghosts. So much fun! After getting the plunger from Ingward, I unclog New Londo and scurry my way over to the Four Kings. Now, you might have noticed that something's a little different about me. Something about my HUD is a little different. That's because, after about 10 attempts of making literally zero progress at all against any of the Four Kings, I realized that a range-focused, no poise, low vitality and endurance build was not gonna fly against the Four Kings. I pulled it off in New Game, but I barely pulled it off, and now the Kings have a lot more health and, I think, do a lot more damage. I could survive a sword swing if I wasn't in the sweet spot range, but that homing magical purple blade blast that tracks onto you for 15 entire seconds, or the giant magic blast? No. I couldn't survive either of those if I got hit, and by the time I had completely avoided the homing magic blade thing, another king would spawn in, so I unfortunately had to make a concession. At this point, I had two options: use a shield with high magic defense, or boost vitality. I didn't like going over SL160 as I thought that was an appropriate level of power for Gwyndolin, but if I had to choose between boosting vitality and using a shield, at least boosting vitality had a roleplay reason. Essentially, my logic was that my health with 99 vitality in the Fap Ring was close to Gwyndolyn's actual health value, so I duped Gwyn's soul and boosted my vitality to 99, and here we are. Even so, it was a closer fight than you'd expect. I missed a couple of soul spears and ran out of soul spears, great soul arrows, and even great heavy soul arrows, but finally, after basically taking down the last king via death by 1,000 cuts with homing soul mass, I was finally able to beat the Four Kings, at which point I was able to equip my last Fap Ring. Next up is Nito, but before we can challenge him, I've got to take on Pinwheel.
Poor souls, but a man who only wanted to save his family. You meddled with forces beyond your comprehension, but I shall reunite you all in peaceful bliss in the afterlife.
Pinwheel wasn't a difficult fight per se, but he definitely actually felt like a real boss fight on a Sorcery NG Plus run. I picked away at him with the Darkmoon bow while dodging his fireballs and dispatching his clones, and before long, Pinwheel had been defeated. Obligatory Pinwheel mask drop guess, what do you guys think I got? Mask of the Child? Not Giant Dad, but I'll take it. Patches betrays me and pushes me down a hole, a mistake he'll soon come to regret. But here I run into Rhea and can finish my Moonlit Puppet challenge. Beyond this point, I can't help her anymore or decide her fate, but I aid her one last time in bringing peace to her hollowed allies. After that, I attempt to take vengeance on Patches, but he falls down the hole. A fitting punishment, I suppose. Paladin Leroy tries to use the Wrath of the Gods miracle to destroy me, but little does he know that I am the Wrath of the Gods personified. Now it's time to take on the penultimate Lord of the Run, Grave Lord Nito.
Lord of Graves, first of the dead, thy soul is strong, thy power vast. Know that though thou art indeed mighty, verily I tell you this, thou doth face against the progeny of the great Lord. For I am Gwyndolin, Lord of the Moonlight.
The boss himself wasn't all that difficult. The difficulty entirely came solely from these fucking skeletons! They would literally crowd up on me and shred me to pieces, sometimes before even Nito got involved. And for whatever reason, for this run, Nito seemingly turned off friendly fire because he rarely ever destroyed his own adds like he normally does. On the bright side, respawning at the bonfire let me finish off patches, but that was a paltry reward. I definitely considered trading the Skull Lantern for the Ring of Fog so that I didn't have to deal with the adds, but then I would have had to take off my last Fap Ring and lose those sweet bonuses to health and stamina for good, so that's a no-go. After a couple of frustrating boss fights against these 3 skeletons, which gave me PTSD flashbacks to the Capra Demon fight, I was able to get in close on Nito, spam Soul Spears, and tank his miasma releases that the skeletons wouldn't be able to survive, at which point I was able to defeat Nito with my 12th and final Soul Spear. That's 3 lords down, 1 to go. After a lovely chat with the Brass Knightus, I take out the Crystal Knight with my Darkmoon bow, just barely failed to defeat the Mighty Sif in our initial encounter, and then technically fail the run since I can't hit this git with the bow or magic, but this doesn't count. I speedrun the Duke's Archives, give the Crystal Caves the same treatment, and then I face Sif himself, our final lord.
Hear me, Duke. Your lord commands thee to give thy aid. No, thou art too far gone. Thy mind is broke, and thy heart is warped. If thou shalt not relinquish to me what is rightfully mine, then thy dukedom is forfeit, as is thy life.
This fight was an absolute joke. I literally just moved close to Sif, blasted him with magic, moved back, did it again, and just kept doing that over and over, and he barely ever even hit me. I was concerned since I expected him to be highly resistant to magic damage for obvious reasons, and magic damage is all I can deal, but if he did resist it, I definitely couldn't tell. I did eventually run out of magic due to some soul spears missing and homing soul mass doing not so great damage in general, but after that, I just kept firing moonlight arrows at him with the Darkmoon bow and inching away from him when he got closer, and that was literally it. The last Lord Soul was by and large the easiest one to get. Alright, now it's finally time for the last boss. My father, Great Lord Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. I easily first tried him on New Game using a strat I'll talk about in a bit, but suffice it to say that things weren't going to be that easy this time around, even with a significantly larger health pool. Gwyndolin stands at the threshold of the Kiln of the First Flame, his slender frame dwarfed by the ruined majesty of what was once the heart of Lord Gwyn's kingdom. The embers of his father's sacrifice still flicker in the ashen winds, casting long shadows across the broken stone. Before him, slumped and shambling, is the husk of his once great father, the Lord of Sunlight, reduced to a mindless Lord of Cinder. The golden radiance that once heralded his presence is gone, leaving only a charred, hollowed revenant, barely clinging to the remnants of its former self. Gwyndolin's gaze lingers on the pitiful sight. His father, the god to whom he had devoted himself so utterly, is nothing more than a fading ember. The deceptions, the illusions, the desperate attempts to uphold the old order, it had all been for this? A destiny of ruin, of mindless decay? His voice, always soft, trembles with a mixture of sorrow and resolve.
Father, my lord, is this truly all that remains of you? The mighty Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, reduced to a husk, a slave to the embers of a failing age?
There is no response, no recognition, no warmth. The figure that was once Gwyn shuffled forward, greatsword in hand, eyes vacant of thought.
All my life I upheld your will. I wove illusions to veil your absence, sustained Anor Londo in your name, nurtured your legacy with lies so that none would know the truth, that you had doomed yourself to this fate. And yet, I see it now. This was always where our path would end.
Gwyndolin steps forward, the arcane light of the Darkmoon shimmering around him. He does not raise his voice, nor does he plead. There is no need.
Once I prayed for your return, but now I see I must deliver you from this torment. Rest, Father. I shall take your burden and your fate.
With a final breath, he steadies himself, and the battle begins. So basically what this fight boiled down to was being able to actually hit Gwyn, while of course avoiding being hit myself. Because of the Forsaken Father challenge, I can't parry Gwyn, and while it normally wouldn't be a big deal since I can't riposte him anyway, it would have actually benefited me since he can't dodge while staggered. See, Gwyn may be the only boss in the game that's parryable, but he's also one of few bosses in the game that dodges ranged attacks as well, making it incredibly hard to actually tag him. The strategy I found as a workaround was, ironically, to use one of the primary sorceries of the run, Homing Soul Mass. When Gwyn dodges ranged attacks, he's not actually dodging the attack, he's dodging the button input. So when I cast Soul Spear, he reads the input and dodges the subsequent attack. But with Homing Soul Mass, all the input does is cast the spell, which just sets up the Soul Mass. The input doesn't actually launch the attack. That causes Gwyn to dodge absolutely nothing, which was honestly pretty useful to stop him from closing the distance sometimes. And when the Soul Mass actually fires, Gwyn's AI doesn't register the attack, so he just face tanks it. Something else about Homing Soul Mass that's incredibly useful for this fight is that, by virtue of it firing automatically after being casted, I could dodge an attack from Gwyn and attack simultaneously, which also nets me bonus counter damage now that I think about it. Also, in addition to negating his ability to dodge, slowing him down, allowing me to attack and defend at the same time, and getting counter damage, it also, of course, homes onto him, something particularly useful against such a fast and agile boss. I won't pretend that this fight was easy, but the only difficulty of it was really just small stupid mistakes and skill issues. Homing Soul Mass was mostly useful for normal enemies throughout the run because Soul Spear always did way more damage and most bosses were easy targets, but for this fight, it was king. Homing Soul Mass sweep, Gwyndolin solos. Even as he strikes down the last embers of his father's will, he feels the weight of his own doom settle upon him. As Gwyn falls, Gwyndolin steps forward, past his father's fading ashes, towards the first flame. No prophecy had led him here, no grand design of fate, only the quiet, bitter understanding that if no one else would bear this burden, then he alone must. He kneels, he closes his eyes, and as the fire takes him, he whispers his final words.
May the sun rise once more.
With that, all challenges are complete. I beat the game wearing Gwyndolin's clothes and only using his weapons. I completed the last air challenge by rekindling the first flame. I completed Darkmoon Justice by joining the Blades of the Darkmoon Covenant and achieving max rank. I didn't attack or dispel Guinevere's illusion in Anor Londo, completing Illusory Reign. With the exception of the Snake Man in the Duke's Archive, I avoided direct melee combat entirely, completing the Hidden Sun challenge. I completed Execution of the Heretic by killing Lautrec. I completed Forsaken Father by beating Gwyn without parrying him. I succeeded on Moonlight's influence and No Light But the Moon by wearing the Moonlight Seance ring throughout the entire run and not killing any Firekeepers. And I did the Chosen Must Prove Themselves by beating at least 5 bosses with only sorcery and bow attacks. I also completed all the mandatory NPC interactions. I spoke with Frampt and placed the Lord Vessel with him. I bought 99 indictments from Oswald, I beat Ornstein first, and I basically played Rhea's quest throughout to nearly completion. Finally, I avoided Priscilla entirely, I didn't join the Way of White Covenant, I also technically killed 2 out of 3 of the Paladins with Rhea, and of course I did not join the Dark Wraiths and never struck Koth. In hindsight, I maybe should have killed Petrus since Oswald claims he's a sinner and he does abandon Rhea and Nico and Vince in the Catacombs, but that would have aggroed Rhea, so I'll take what I can get. Thank you all so much for watching, friends, and until my next Dark Souls challenge run, which will probably be DS2 as the Smelter Demon, I bid thee a warm goodbye. Peace.